right, thank you for coming. Thanks for having me. So this talk is not exactly an experience report, but it's my tale of learning about test automation, leading a team doing only test automation at a company that didn't really get what test automation was. The whole big ships are hard to turn line comes from the company I feel is relatively large compared to other companies I've seen, at least for the size of the QA and dev group, and the difficulties we had trying to get them to take on automation, testability, things like that. So a bit of introductions. You already know I'm Erik. I'm the other Erik. I am actually currently a QA engineer. I don't actually lead the team that I talk about in this talk anymore, but that doesn't mean I'm going to say bad things about them. And I don't think it affects the talk because I still cover the timeline of the 2.5 years when I led the team. I was the former manager of test automation, which means I had 3 people reporting to me doing automation at a company that had 250 testers and 300 plus devs. So we were able to accomplish a lot. I also like orange. If you don't like orange, I'm sorry. I can't change it now. So this is going to be a lot of orange. And I'm wearing orange. And I have orange. And I'm the Erik with shoes. And my shoes are orange. If you can't see them in the back, you can come look at them later. Some general assumptions. When I use the term automation, I try to use it in a really vague way on purpose because I don't like to limit people's creativity. So to me, automation is any code or tool or script or thing that you create or use to assist humans in testing. We really struggled initially at the company I was at, getting them to understand. To them, automation meant I'm going to go out and pay a large sum of money for a piece of software that's going to let me press some buttons, and then I don't need people anymore. And we had to explain to them that that is a way to do it, but your software is really kind of shitty, and it's not going to work that way. So we're going to, automate little tiny tests that are mind-numbing for people to do. We're going to try to automate some, UI testing in the web and all these other things, and we had to define what automation meant there because they had what I felt sort of a wrong understanding of it. I do use the term QA. I've been in the debates about, and I feel myself personally that our department should have been called test or testing, not quality assurance. I didn't feel that it was worthwhile at that company to have that battle. So if there's anybody who's really strongly on the don't call it QA side, I guess you can hit me with things. I'd rather you don't. But I say QA because it's where I was for 17 years in a couple different companies. So I get it, but it wasn't worth having that debate. And yes, I do say automated tests. I get the checking versus testing thing. Correctly, I would normally want to say automated checks. It's a thing that we taught brand new testers at the company in new employee training, the difference between checking and testing, but we didn't enforce a strict standard we didn't beat them with things if they said they were testing when it was a check. There's a difference. I understand it philosophically, but I'm going to say automated tests. Again, if you choose to hit me with things, I guess I can't really do much. So my conclusion of the talk here at the beginning, automation is difficult. It's not an easy thing. It can be difficult. I should say can. I need more safety language. It can be very time consuming. It can be very frustrating on a number of levels. And it can be the process can be very, very slow. But I also feel that it's worth it, or it can be, if you apply it intelligently. Generally, my definition of intelligent automation, which isn't a term I feel I've coined, I just say that a lot, is sort of the opposite of not the opposite, but not the automate all the things. Because I don't think you can automate all the things. I've known people who felt you could automate all the things, and I think that's dumb. So I don't think you can automate everything. I don't think you should not try to automate at all, but somewhere in the middle to me is applying it intelligently. So my recommendation would be if you haven't been involved in automation, if your teams aren't attempting to automate anything, and you're at the beginning, which this is like a beginner level talk. So if you've been automating for years, you probably know all these things, and maybe you just like orange or you just wanted a chair. That's fine. So find someone who's done it before and learn from their mistakes. Don't reinvent the wheel. Learn from other people who've tried it and try to start at a little further in than, hey, my boss said I'm now leading a team doing automation. So a bit of background on me. There we go. I was formerly lots of things, including the manager of test automation. I almost got a computer science degree way back in the 1990s. I didn't like the really advanced math, so I changed degrees and never used it, but that's okay. Before I was the manager of test automation, I was the manager of testing, which meant I was supposed to be in charge of how 250-ish people approach testing, even though none of them reported to me, which was a whole other talk that's weird. 17 plus-ish years in QA or QA adjacent roles. I'm back actually touching software testing now, but I spent about 10 years in leadership. So I don't really like to say that I've had 17 years in testing because I was leading people who were testing. And it's not really testing, that's people management. And I don't really like it, which is why I'm really happy to be back to testing now. I was a senior manager at one point, which was when I was managing managers, and I really don't like that. I tried hard, but and I spent 14 years, a little over 14 years at the company that I'm covering in this talk. So I was there for a lot of things. We went from 14 testers to 250 plus. I grew through all those things, and it was in the time period covered in this talk, which starts around 2014, was their first real effort at automation of any kind in the 14 years that I'd been there. So they hadn't really thought of it much, but we sort of, a bit of what Erik was talking about in the other Erik, in his talk, about you need to look just a little bit beyond what's going on within your company. We didn't do that for pretty much anything for a very, very long time, and that was bad. But we at least started, which is something. I am currently a QA engineer someplace else. I've been a bunch of roles. I guess I already said all that. So the company, who I'm not naming because they really didn't send me here because I don't work for them anymore, but they didn't send me here so they don't get an ad. They make and sell software and related services all over the world, predominantly in the United States. It's US focused. They sell a lot into South America, Europe, Asia. They're all over. They have a tiny little office in Australia now because it's a good market for them. The product they advertise as a single enterprise information platform for managing content, processes, cases, and it goes on for a really long time, and I didn't want to put it all on the slide. The short of it is it's document management, document imaging software that has a bunch of other add-on things. I know there's at least 2 people here who know what it is because one of them worked there and has now also left. And then her husband, who knew that she worked there. But I don't know if anybody else does. But again, I'm not giving them a free ad, so that's fine. Officially, they said they only had one product. They gave everything one name, but it was actually made up of 300 plus modules, which meant it was a lot of littler-ish things that all supposedly tied in together and went into one giant database, which affects a bit of the discussion later on the complexity of the product and trying to automate. It runs on a lot of different things. It actually did run on BlackBerry once, and then BlackBerry kind of imploded, and they said, screw that, we're not supporting them anymore. I believe it still works on Windows Phone, because that's, viable. But it runs all over the place. And some modules only work in certain places. There's web components. There's all kinds of different things. There is an old school-ish client server. Install the executable on your PC and it connects through ODBC out to a giant database somewhere style client they're trying to get rid of because we call it the thick client. And apparently that doesn't go over well with customers, but that's our thick client. They have a web client that talks through an app server, so it's a little bit more advanced, but it's still written fairly poorly. They have a WPF client, which also talks through an application server. So there's a variety of different platforms. There's a variety of different ways that the product works. So there isn't a single tech stack. It's not a single primary focus that the product works on. it does a lot of different things, which is great for customers, but kind of a pain for testing. So the team that I had, our giant focused group of automators, when the team was created, the initial idea was to have a mix of devs and testers. So when the idea was proposed, you said, okay, we're going to get some devs who really want to make things better, and they're going to write the code so that we can automate stuff. And then we're going to get some testers who are a little bit more technical than everybody else, because all the testers we hire are straight out of school. They don't really know anything about testing, and generally they don't have a computer science background. Many of them don't have a degree of any kind or any kind of technical experience. We just kind of get a gut feeling in the interview that, hey, they might be good at testing, and then we teach them what testing is on like day 15. So we're going to find some of the testers who know some more of the things and put them with the devs, and they'll do the running of the tests, and the devs will do the maintenance and the building of the tests. But no devs wanted to participate. We had an associate VP of development twice, advertised that positions existed, intentionally did not mention that it was going to report into QA, because, oh my God, devs don't want to be in QA, don't. So didn't say that, just said we have this new role, and no one applied. So we ended up getting people out of QA, all 3 people on the team, because 3 is enough to support 600. 3 people on the team, all out of QA. They all had a technical background, but no formal training. So they taught themselves how to write code. They were building little tools and writing little scripts on their own, just as a manual tester, because they got bored with doing manual testing. And they're like, this is frying my brain. I'd rather write a little script for this. Actually, 2 of them fit into that category. One of them, 11 days before we proposed the idea for the team, brought me a document she wrote, which was a proposal on why the company should be looking into test automation. And I said, you should wait for like a week, and then I've got something to talk to you about. And she joined the team, even though she had no prior experience doing anything, but she had the interest. And I was like, okay, you're going to educate the people, and they're going to write the code, and I really hope this works. Okay, so some history. This is kind of the big part. The 2.5-ish years of me on the team and all of the things we went through. So late summer 2014, I was called into the office of the same AVP who I mentioned before and shown the draft of a presentation. He said, so I think we need to have an automation team. We're going to have a mix of devs and QA. I think it's going to be great. They're going to help us do better things because our devs don't really like, they don't understand the concept of testability. The code is really hard to test even for them. So they just, hey, it compiles, it's good. Give it to QA now. That happened a lot. We had a number of times where they would, pass us a build and you can't log in. That's usually bad. So it's like, okay, so I think I want your input on this. Does this sound like something that would be good at the company? I was like, yeah, it sounds great. So he shows it to the VP of Dev, shows it to the VP of QA. VP of Dev says, yeah, sure, we should do this. And the VP of QA said, great, and we're going to give it to Erik. And at the time, I was the manager of testing, which meant I was actually responsible for the team that did all of our internal QA training, and supposedly somehow changing the way 250 people tested, even though none of them reported to me and supposedly didn't have any time to actually learn anything. I also now was going to be managing test automation, which I didn't know anything about. I knew it was a thing. I had friends who did test automation and had been saying for a number of years, you should learn this thing because it's kind of cool and it'll make you more valuable. And all of a sudden now I had a team. So we gained the 3 people after all of the applications we went through. I worked with a dev manager to do the interview so that we were actually doing a dev grade-ish interview to see if they could write pseudocode-like things on a whiteboard, which is sort of how we hire our devs, apparently. I wasn't in those interviews, but he said that's how they worked it. So we got the first 3 people on the team. We got started late in the year, October 2014. Beginning of the following year, there's a giant, it's 2,000 to 2,500 attendee dev conference with a very small testing track that takes place in Ohio. And I managed to get my entire team to go, basically because I owned the budget, because when I was made the manager of testing, I said, hey, we don't have a conference budget, I want one. And my boss said, okay. And I made up a number and nobody questioned it. So I took my whole team to a conference, which really wasn't that expensive because there were 4 of us. And they learned a ton of things because the one woman we hired who had no prior dev experience of any kind had spent this amount of time trying to learn how to write code. So she had very little experience. The other 2 had done some things, but it was kind of all over the place, and they didn't really understand good coding practices, or they didn't know tools. They knew nothing about Selenium or any of this. So we learned a ton at that conference. They learned more than I did related to automation, because I'm not at the point of trying to catch up with you and be a coder at your level. But I'd like to maybe get there someday, because I haven't written code since the 90s, and you're a little farther along than me. So shortly after the conference, my team was super excited. They'd heard about the White framework. They heard about Selenium. We started investigating the use of Selenium against our web client. It wasn't really so good because we had no automation IDs. We had no meaningful ways to identify any of the components. And it was iframes all the way down. So it was really, really hard to automate, to the point that we actually told the web team, we're not going to talk to you anymore until you fix things. And it took them a year to ever come back. Started learning the White framework so we could apply it to our WPF client, because since we'd given up on the web basically completely and no one wanted to touch the C++ thing that we had that was hopefully going to go away at some point, we chose the WPF client, and we thought maybe we can use the White framework against that. So they started learning White and started trying to learn how to implement it against the WPF client. Yeah, so they learned that didn't really work so good because our product is not written very well. So they threw it out completely, said, hey, we learned a bunch of things using White, but we can't. It doesn't work. It doesn't function with our product. We could go back to dev and say, you need to change the way you've written this thing that's now like 5 years old and huge and lots of people are using, because we can't automate it, but they don't care. They're not going to change anything, so we had to change our focus. So then my team decided, hey, we've learned enough by trying to use White and learning to write code in C# that we're going to just build one. We're going to make our own, and it's going to be awesome. So they began writing what ended up to be effectively a White clone that works only on the product that that company makes. But it does the things you can do in White, but only in that product, because White is usable for normal people, and hopefully with normal products and not at this place. So August 2015, I managed to get my team out to another conference. We went to CAST in Grand Rapids, which was really good because there was a bit more, well, it was all testing focused. There's some technical courses, but they got to go to some testing training as well, which I think was very valuable for them because they'd been testers and they needed to learn a bit of more of the technical side, even though they were starting to write some code. So I was getting them experience to learning new things outside of the building we worked in, because there wasn't much to learn in the building with regards to automation. So we needed to get out and learn from other people. So around the time, a little bit after the conference, I came to the realization that trying to build this massive White framework clone with 3 people, while still sort of trying to hope that the web team comes back and says, hey, we want you to start working on Selenium, we couldn't get all the work done with 3 people. So I managed to convince my boss that we should add a person to the team. We had some, like maybe 5 that we knew of, people in the company who were interested and had some experience, so it might make it easier. So we opened up a rec to gain a person. We interviewed internal and external clients or applicants and found a guy who was in Phoenix, which was fine. We were in Cleveland, but he's okay. It's 2 hours. It's not like here to Ohio. He said he had some coding experience. He interviewed really well over Skype. Or rather, he was in person, but we did an interview over Skype, and he wrote really good things on his whiteboard that we could read. So we hired him. the biggest problem is he couldn't start for a while, but we hired him, which is good. So the team was growing. Towards the end of that year, with our work on the white framework-like thing that we were building, word spread a bit through the WPF teams because we had multiple. We had one team that was responsible for the main product, and then a bunch of other teams that were responsible for components that worked in different platforms. So if there was a team that handled all of the workflow stuff, they had to test it on the WPF client and the thick client and the web and the mobile, because that's the way we divided things up. So some of those teams started coming to us saying, hey, I know that you can do testing, some testing against the WPF client. Can we get in on that too? Which meant we now had even more projects that we needed to work on because we wrote the framework to work with the core bit of the product and now had all of these side pieces coming in that we needed to build extensions to. So the workflow team didn't have to sit there and manually test workflow, which is actually kind of dumb because it's a giant logic engine. You don't really need a person looking at all of it. January 2016, we managed to go to CodeMash again because I still owned the budget. Why not? My team really liked it. They learned even more things, which is great because we'd had a year of them writing C# code. They effectively were full-time developers that entire time. So now they really felt it was awesome to get to go to a dev conference again that they'd been to before. They learned even more that they could use in the next coming year. So February 2016, I was told by my brand new manager that I was going to become, well, I wasn't told. I was offered the opportunity to become full-time focused on automation because we realized that the training piece was basically ran itself. The manager of testing thing was difficult, but probably needed a full-time person, and the automation piece needed a full-time person because we can't get all of it done. And they offered me the option to choose which one I wanted, and I chose automation because I liked the team and I felt it was like we'd get more value out of pushing that harder right now than continuing to hit my head against the wall that was trying to change testing practices of 250 people who didn't have to listen to me. So I picked automation. The only problem, due to weird political things, I didn't get to tell anybody. So I was full-time focused on automation, but my job was still listed as manager of testing, and I was just supposed to not do that job anymore and not tell anybody while only focusing on automation, which no one would notice. That's a fun time. So we got our new guy. He joined us. Shortly after that, I was like, I got to pretend to be doing like 3 jobs and only do one. But our new guy started, which is awesome. So we brought him online. He was working remotely from Phoenix. We actually brought him in for a couple of weeks to sit with the team and sort of bond with them. He was dialing in with them throughout the day, every day, doing screen shares, learning how to code, doing all this work. It was really great. And then at the end of March, he sent me a Skype message and said, hey, can we talk? I was like, okay, you generally just type things at me, but you want to see me. So I went in a room and we Skyped and he said, so I'm a little overwhelmed. I like this automation thing, but I want to like make tests. I don't want to make the frameworks because I don't know what I'm doing. So he went back to his old team to be the guy on that team who's making tests because he was not at the level of being able to write the frameworks that went between our not very well written software and people writing tests. So we were down a person again, and I wasn't allowed to hire to replace. I had a guy, and then now he's gone, and now I'm back to 3. But our workload hadn't changed, which is awesome. So we were still having problems. Shortly after that, we got a bit of a reprieve. The WPF team, the developers, had gone in and added meaningful automation IDs into a large portion of the product, which was amazing. Because previously we'd had to do all kinds of weird magic to try to find all the things, but we managed to find most of the things, and it was good. So they added IDs, and so my team went in and they stripped out a bunch of the crazy code that they had and just said, we're going to use the IDs because that's much more meaningful than the crazy crap we'd done to try to find everything. This is, and I'll cover this later, but if you notice where on the timeline this happens, it'll help you later realize that we probably should have looked for little things sooner. But this is the first example in our run here of building a very small tool for a team that added a lot of value. So a woman that was on our healthcare team came to us, someone on my, I didn't even know they did this. It's great that they managed to put this together and get it back to them, and then later told me, hey, I wrote this thing. But she came to us and said, so I've got this really painful test. I only run it once a release, and they're pretty old school. They do a release a year. Well, I mean, technically they release more, but they have one big one that's like, we stamped it now. Now it's release year number. So she only runs it once a year, and it's her and one or two other people. It takes them 60 hours a piece to run. And there's and I don't know what the component is, but it's exporting a configuration of something that they care about. And it exports it as this giant XML file. And the only way they knew how to test that it exported the right thing was to load the XML file in a viewer and then open up the database and compare. Yeah, that was a good sound. That's what you should make. So they came to us and said, oh my God, I want to shoot myself. Can you help us? So one of the guys on my team spent, I think it was a day and a half, but a lot of that was like asking them questions, not even coding, and wrote them a little tiny comparison tool where you give it the file and you give it the database tables, and it takes like 4 seconds and will tell you that yes, it all matches, or no, it doesn't. That's the rough comparison of the price difference between the two tests. And I say rough because I didn't ask the individual testers what their salary was. I estimated it. And I didn't look at the cost of electricity to run the machine to do the test. That's the cost of the person running the test, the time that they want to run it. That was a really fun bar graph to present to management, to say so it used to cost this really big bar, and it now costs this bar that basically isn't a bar anymore. After that, we had teams coming from all over the place saying, I've got a really annoying test like that too. I don't want to do that anymore. So we ended up modifying the tool so that lots of teams who had, I don't know why everybody had these XML dumps, but all of these XML exports, you can compare it to the database rather than having to do it by, in person. So we started building all of these little tools for all of these teams, which helped raise awareness about what my team was trying to do. Because this chunk of time, we didn't do so much of that because we were sort of heads down trying to build this masterful WPF framework that we're going to like dump on the world at some point in the future, and they're going to, shower us in flowers or praise, or I don't know. They're going to like us. So we started gaining a lot of momentum within QA at least, after we wrote that little tool and then talked about it with the other QA managers, because there were 23 of us, I think, 24. It was a weirdly sized team. So we had a lot of teams coming at us asking for help with all these little things, which was great. We just started a little late. So around June, I actually got to tell people I was full-time on automation and hadn't, now I'm full-time automation, and everybody realized immediately, because they're not idiots, that I'd been that since February, and it wasn't just that I was slacking off and not doing my job. It's that I was told to not do my job, and I wasn't allowed to tell anybody. I don't think my VP at the time ever understood that. He just thought, well, nobody will notice. But he doesn't really value the team that much. Part of why I don't work there anymore. So our automation IDs went away, which kind of sucks. So the WPF team, after putting all of these IDs in, decided to rewrite the viewer in that part of the product. And it was a brand new project. We knew it existed. They rewrote the viewer, and the dev in charge decided that he didn't really care and just backed out all of my team's, like the changes that were made for my team, and then dumped in all of his new code, which had no IDs in it. And now we were kind of screwed because we couldn't find anything anymore in the viewer, which is kind of an important product that deals with documents and seeing stuff. So we had to go back to the code that they had ripped out before, because we're like, now we have a nice, easy way to do it, and put in all of the, I need to figure out how to find these components now because the IDs are all gone. We really weren't very happy, but the dev didn't care, and his manager said, we don't have time to fix it, which also sucks. So shortly after that, we got hit again. Our VP of QA, had gone to a symposium put on by a test automation consultancy about test automation consultancies, amazingly, and was sold on the idea that we could write them a very large sum of money and they'll come in and do all our automation for us. That'd be great. They didn't really give many details. It was just, we can help you start your automation. And we tried to talk to him but we do all of the things that they say they're going to do for you already. If you bring them in, we're going to be throwing away pretty much all of that so that we can start from scratch with someone from the outside coming in and telling us how to do it. And oh, by the way, their model is to host all of your stuff so that you can't actually own it. So they'll be the ones like hosting your tests and things out in their stuff. So you have to keep paying them to use it, it's a really good model, but I didn't want to buy into it. So my team, my senior manager, myself, multiple dev managers, devs that were involved in the automation effort, which was still small, decided that we needed to do something about this before it turned into we're now bringing in this outside consultancy and they're going to just throw away everything we've been working on. So we put together I don't even remember how long, it ended up being an hour-long talk basically, but we put together a proposal, a presentation on why this was a dumb idea. We just didn't say it like that. There were better wordsmiths than me. I didn't write it. I just was involved in the creation. So we put together this presentation on why we felt it would not be valuable to continue talking to these people. Presented it to the manager of QA, manager of dev, manager of tech support, because for some reason they invited him and I'm not sure why. The executive VP or senior VP, I don't know what she was. She owned all of R&D. That had happened in the middle of all this too. We started under a CTO who thought automation was a waste of time. We just didn't tell him we were doing it. And ended under a executive vice president who came out of sales and basically didn't know anything technical at all. So that was fun. But we convinced her that, okay, we probably shouldn't move forward with bringing in these people and throwing away everything we've done. We actually are farther along than they thought because when we said things, they didn't listen. And we managed to get that paused to the point where when my senior manager was invited to an amazingly similar symposium in Southern Ohio from this company where they wanted to bring him in and show him stuff and give him a bottle of bourbon and say, we'd like you to sign things, he went down and said, no, thank you, and got to keep the bourbon, which I think it worked out for him, except that he had to drive like 6 hours south to tell them we don't want to give you any money, thank you for the bourbon, which he didn't share, which is kind of rude, but that's okay. So a bit after this, partly because of the tools we were creating here for multiple teams, partly because we had begun talking more about automation in general, we'd actually run a lunch and learn training program over that summer where anybody who wanted to could dial in or come to the giant conference room and hear short talks about automation or testability or code reviews, because, wow, we didn't really do code reviews because that's, not useful at all. We were beginning to get more and more people that were interested in automation. If they were in QA, basically they knew nothing about it, unless they happened to be going to conferences, in which case I knew who they all were and I was already trying to roll them all in. They didn't know anything about what automation was. They probably didn't know how to write any kind of code in a meaningful way at all. And the only training we had available were things my team was putting together on writing tests for the tool that they had built, which there's a giant assumed amount of knowledge that has to happen before you can get there, because it's writing C# code against this giant thing that was written in C# that's sitting on top of a WPF application, which we realized eventually really wasn't a great way to start things, but we'll get to that. So a team lead on a random QA team decided he wanted to make a introduction to development course, introduction to coding course for testers, which is amazing because we had some Pluralsight access, we had access to some online self-paced training, but not enough and our VP wasn't willing to pay for it for anybody who just wanted it in the department. It was very limited. So he ended up, with the assistance of some developers and some of the development trainers, put together a training course. It ended up, I think it was like a half a week over 2 weeks. So it's not very much training, but it's a start on, this is how you write code. Here's some of the basic concepts of writing C# code, just because that was the focus at the time. And the classes filled up immediately, to the point where as soon as they announced we were doing one class a quarter, the next year and a half filled up, and they began trying to train other people to teach the class so that at some point we can have more than, it was like 10 or 15 people a quarter learning how to do this, because we had hundreds, or at least 100, that wanted to know how to do this right now, and we couldn't accommodate them in the training. Because, I mean, the guy running the class, the team lead, was not a professional trainer, even though he worked with our training group, but he also had a day job because he led a very large team that did all the manual testing on the WPF client that we're trying to automate. So he was interested in it, but he kind of had a day job and needed to continue doing that. So we couldn't just say, we're going to do a class a month or two classes a month, because he still had work he had to get done. But we were gaining converts. We were getting more people interested in automation, which I think in the end was a big start. Just getting people to realize it's a thing and that it could add value, because we weren't there in the beginning. So this entire time, my team, when we started, were given hand-me-down dev machines, which functioned. They were better than the QA machines. But during the entirety of the timeline, they never got upgraded, even though I'd had it in the budget for 3 consecutive budget years. Things just happened. I still don't completely understand the procurement process at that company, even though I was there for 14 years, which is kind of annoying because we needed to buy things. But we'd still been fighting through all of this to try to get them better hardware, because they would have their machines with blue screen because you can't run too much on them, or you get 9 Chrome tabs and Visual Studio going and the machines just explode. Or when the virus scan runs on one of them, it sounds like a jet engine, and you can't do anything for 40 minutes. It was fun. We had nice large monitors. The machines were pretty shitty. One of the things that we'd been trying to do this entire time, but weren't successful at until almost January of this year, was trying to get development to understand that the only way that we were going to get automation to really take hold on the development side, and by saying automation there, I mean creating the software in a way to allow us to automate it when it gets to QA, and also having it easier to test for devs themselves, because some teams did some unit tests. Many of them wrote tests in NUnit and thought they were unit tests because the product had unit in the name. We basically had almost no integration tests. We really didn't have UI tests of any kind. So we were trying to get the devs to look at writing the software so that it was easier to test from the beginning. The only way that was going to happen is if we modified the project timing and the project planning. We'd done this with security a couple years before, where somebody came out and said, we want to be more secure and our software kind of sucks and it needs to be secure, go. And nobody really did anything because we didn't adjust timelines. We didn't make it a requirement. People cared, but they're like, I've got too many things. What thing do I not do? And they basically came back and said, well, all of those make us money, so you can't not do any of them. Until dev management came through and said, okay, we really need this to take hold. So we're going to put one of the associate VPs in charge of, we're going to make him in charge of the security effort. And it is now going to be a requirement for every new project that you have to go through a security plan. You have to state how you're going to review the effects on security for the product and the testing that you're going to do and all of these things up front, and that needs to be accounted for in your project plan, or your project will automatically be denied, which eventually got through to the developers, because they're like, I'm supposed to be making things that make us money, but I can't get my project even looked at because I forgot the security thing. So we eventually got through to development that was the only real way that we were going to make meaningful progress in automation. So almost 2.5 years in, we got them to say, and the timing is interesting, but we got them to say that, okay, on future projects, we are going to put a line in there that there needs to be discussion of automation, and the timing of the project is likely going to need to be adjusted so that the devs can begin to learn how to do this, which means that the project scope is going to have to be reduced or the timeline is going to have to change because they're having to do things they don't know how to do even though they should. We're also going to plan appropriately as best we can without having never done it before to modify the testing time in there as well to compensate for. We're trying to add some automation in, which eventually someday will mean less manual, but right now nobody really knows what the hell they're doing, so everything's just going to be longer. So we got that incorporated in. The only real rough part is the next release happens about right here, which means all of the current projects already exist. They've existed for months. We weren't actually going to see a project plan with automation involved for like 4 more months. But the fact that they said they were going to do it is something. The dev VP said to his entire department, I want this to be a focus. This is the thing we're going to do. So there's the promise of it. And I really hope for them that they actually do it, because they would, right about now would be when they're trying to plan for the next release, because they should have released since I left. So I hope that continues, but they promised that they would do it. We just never actually saw it, because right around the time that we're getting into release mode, okay, well, we can't actually put it in any projects, but we will at some point. Don't worry about it. And then that's when I left. So that's sort of the end of my tale. I know a little bit beyond the end, but relevant for this piece, that is the extent of our initial first ever effort at trying to implement automation at a relatively large-ish company with a couple thousand employees. So here's a bit of the learning from mistakes of people who've tried to do things like this in case you ever want to try to do something like this. I might say maybe just don't, but that's a little nihilistic. You need to make sure you have dedicated people. We got that when we started the team, it was our first time ever having, we had 3, but having people whose full-time job was focused on test automation, trying to set it up so that other people could create tests. There were multiple prior efforts, usually within development, where you'd have a full-time developer, full-time dev lead, trying to start something like this, but it was a side project. And they always ended up dying, either because the person was really good and left and took the whole thing with them because nobody knew how to keep it going, or they just didn't have the time. They thought it was a really good idea. They'd set up little committees and talk about it and say, this is really cool, we should do this thing. And then they never did it because they didn't have the time, or they weren't allowed to allot the time to actually work on it. It really is a full-time effort, especially at a larger company, especially if the product is not simple. You need people looking at this full-time. This is my experience. I'm not saying it's going to be this way everywhere, but at a larger company trying to implement automation from nothing, you need some people who are doing this full-time. You're not going to get magic out of part-timers. It's not going to work. We tried a number of times. We tried rolling people in to work with us part-time from their manual testing teams, and we would get a little bit out of them, but then some big project would come up and now I don't have time anymore, and then they just fell off. And 4 months later they come back and go, hey, so can I pick back up where we left 4 months ago? Oh, by the way, I don't remember anything you told me. So continuing on with that, you really need to have people on this full time. If you've got a large number of teams, multiple products, you might get to the point where in the beginning, you need a person on each team who's dedicating time to this to bring that particular team up to speed to actually be able to automate some of the tests. We ended up with my team and some test developers, which is a position that development created around the time that we were trying to grow our team, which was kind of weird, but it was okay because it was some people that could help us. But they were still only doing this kind of part-time working with us. They were full-time on automation, but most of their work was on the dev side writing unit tests, because our devs are like, hey, I have a person who knows how to code and I don't have to write my unit tests now, so I'm going to give it all to that guy. That happened a lot, but they did work with us some, so it helped, and it was a start, but it was slow. It's also not an easy thing, especially at a company, if you don't have people who have a meaningful technical background, if they don't know anything about writing code, if they don't understand coding practices, you need to have people who are dedicated to the effort and who are interested and have a desire to learn how to do it. We had a number of people who said, yeah, this sounds cool, I want to be involved, and then they realized how much they needed to learn to get from where they were to where they probably should be to even just start, and they just disappeared. They stopped talking to us because they realized this is going to take me months and months of training, and I've got a day job. So you need people who are willing, potentially, to put some time in at work on learning. They might need to do some on their own time if they're really interested in it. I don't know rules, laws, anything anywhere else. I know in the US, generally you can't demand that someone put in their own time to learn a thing, but it's really helpful if they're willing to do it on their own just because they see the value in it. Sort of going back to the willingness to learn, you need people who will persevere through the difficulties. Even the people who managed to get through the training, some of them found the effort so difficult because of how poorly written the product was in general, that they would kind of stop trying after a while because it was really difficult. I know people who've been involved in automation efforts that were much easier to do because they work for a company where it's a web app and it runs on 2 kinds of devices, and there's a tool that will do the automation that we just plug in and look, it's magic. We couldn't do any of that because our stuff was written, the thick client was started, there's code in there from 1991. The C# client originally wasn't C#, so they rewrote it once. Came into existence somewhere in the early 2000s. Our web applications are also very old. They're not written, they don't know what HTML, they know what HTML5 is, and newer things, they just can't use them. As I said, it's iframes all the way down. It's really bad. So you need people who are willing to stick with it and learn how to do the things they need to do. They need to learn the product and how to work with it, especially if it's a difficult product to work with. I hope that nobody else runs into products that are this painful to deal with if you're attempting to automate it. There's probably some out there, but I'm hoping that you all have modernly coded tools and products that you're laughing. I don't think you do. Is yours bad? Or is it you have a good one? And you're laughing because my story is painful. Yeah, okay. That's good. I'd rather that nobody else go through most of this pain because it really sucked. Another thing I found very difficult, and I understand it's sort of human nature, you want the easy way to get things done. Lots and lots of people want an easy solution. They want to be able to just, throw money at a company and say, come and do the things for me, or give me the tool that'll do all my stuff, and then, I'll buy the tool and I can fire the people, and yay, it's easy now. And you have to put the time and the effort in to explain to them, especially with a product that was as painful as this one was, how that's not going to work, that there is no easy way out. There may be in some situations, but none of them worked for us. So you have to have the information to be able to provide to them, especially if they're several levels above you and in control of things like budgets and time and planning and who you can hire and fire and all that. You need to be able to explain to them the difficulties in the effort and why it's still valuable. Because they're going to want to, they're going to listen to some talk at a symposium and go, "Ooh, these people said they can do it all for us." It takes a lot of time. It can take a lot of time, especially on a large, difficult product. You're not going to get it done you're not going to be able to automate everything that can be meaningfully automated in days or weeks or maybe months. Smaller products, yes, you can get there, especially if the devs have had modern training on writing code and they designed it in a way so that you can more easily automate it. That's awesome. I wish this product was like that, but it wasn't. So it took us a lot of time to learn the product. It took us a lot of time to learn the coding practices for people who are not professional coders, who now are professional coders because they learned it all on the job. But all of it just takes time. Unless your product is simple and sits on a single tech stack. And if you live there, then I'm really jealous. But I guess it would have made for a less interesting talk about the struggles, because I don't know how many there would have been. But I've not had that experience. So maybe next year somebody can do that talk and go, this is amazing. That guy last year, he shouldn't work there anymore. It takes time researching. So looking into all the things, learning the product, figuring out best practices for automation. I didn't want to say best practices, sorry. He laughed. Some people, like 3 people, totally get that. Looking into the best ways to approach certain methods in automation, or the best ways to basically do everything. Because my team came in from scratch with no knowledge. They knew that we wanted to do automation. That meant writing some code, and the learning started there. But before we could learn, we had to research to find out what things are actually meaningful to learn, which ones can we make use of, which ones can we not apply. And then we had to learn the things that we'd researched and found out we think we can actually use. And sometimes you need to throw things away, like the whole white framework. We learned, they researched, thought it would work, wrote code against it, realized it wouldn't function, and we just had to get rid of it. But they still learned things. It takes time to build. If you're at a level of trying to build a framework, which I'm kind of realizing now wasn't probably a great idea, but it's how we approached it because we didn't know any better. It takes time to build. So building the automation in, it's not magic. You can't just have it done overnight. You need to allot time for building and maintaining, which is another thing that the people who don't know much about automation, who tend to sit several levels up and write the checks, really don't understand. That's one of the magic tricks that I've seen multiple people at higher levels. It's like, well, you write the automation, and then you make it run every so often, and then you leave it alone, right? That doesn't work, because somebody makes a change, and now half of your test suite is just puking and won't run. And you have to go back and fix it, or research it, and find out if the change the dev made broke the tests in a way that you now need to modify the tests, or if a change was made and it's an issue and you now need to report it to the devs to say, hey, you broke a thing that you shouldn't have broken. And that takes time. It can take a lot of time and a lot of effort. And generally, automation isn't magic. It can feel like it, especially if you have a tool where you can do that and magic things happen. We didn't have any of that. We had no magic involved. The time has to come from somewhere. You have to plan for it. So you need to, it's likely to affect future projects, especially if you're injecting something like automation into a company that doesn't do it now, and they don't allot for any slack time in their project planning. It's just nonstop. Your project ended, now you're on a new one. Your project ended, you're on a new one. They're accounting for all of the person's time. It's going to pull functionality, it's going to pull scope out of projects, or it's going to make the projects take longer. That you can't do it any other way. Speaking of costs, when we started the team, we didn't actually have our own budget. So they made a team, said we're going to put people on it, we're going to give you hand-me-down dev hardware because we already own it, we're going to kind of throw it away, but here, you can have it. I eventually made them buy us monitors. My team monitors, I didn't really need big monitors because, I don't know, I wasn't coding. You need to have a budget. I would recommend from the beginning getting the money up front so that you know that it shows some intent in continuing to grow the team from the company. I realized that way late, that not being given the budget in the beginning was kind of them saying, yeah, we think this is a good thing, but we don't actually want to show it because we're not going to assign you any money or anything. So we sort of moved things around a bit from other budgets, but it was really a hassle. If you're writing serious code, you probably are going to need better hardware unless everybody in your QA department already has like dev grade hardware. We didn't have that, so we needed to get anyone who wanted to take this on in any meaningful way, they all had to have better machines. You're probably going to have to improve the infrastructure on the back end to support tests, unless it's a very, very small company with a very small team. We had to bring in our infrastructure team to put in new servers, to get new VMs, to upgrade equipment so that they could support us when we got to the point of actually having tests for people to execute. And you're probably going to have to improve other things on the system. So we had to upgrade the Visual Studio that different people had. We need to get them involved in Pluralsight or other training, which has a cost. I really like Pluralsight. I don't get any money from them. I'll give them an ad because they're really awesome, but you have to pay for it. From my team, beer, movie tickets, and candy, that's really their only main motivations. So I bought them a lot of beer, and we went to see a lot of Marvel movies, and I had candy on my desk all the time. So that kind of kept them from wanting to jump out the window. For large, really painfully complex products that were not designed by developers who understand how to write testability into the code, most off-the-shelf tools are not going to meet your needs. I've kind of already covered that, but especially with large products, you need to be prepared to build your own thing, likely be prepared to build your own thing. But you should still look at tools. So my team reviewed tons and tons of tools, partly to know what's out there, to see what people who are professionally trying to sell automation to companies, the things they're trying to accomplish and how they're trying to accomplish them, to gain ideas that we could incorporate into the tools that we were building. And also to fend off the well-intentioned. So we had a number of people who thought, automation's cool, I want to go learn it on my own. Hey, I found this cool little free thing, and I'm going to start using it. Most of the time, we could go back to them and go, okay, we've already looked at this, and you're going to hate your life very soon, because it's going to be painful, and here are the reasons why it doesn't work. And being able to come back to them and say, this is why this doesn't work, was really, really helpful. You need to get real top-level promotion of automation. We had some for a while. We eventually got it a couple years in. But from the beginning, you need senior management higher up, promoting the fact that automation is the thing that you want to do, or it's going to be difficult to succeed. We did end up getting senior management. It just took us a long time. You also need to allocate time for people to work on automation if they don't know how to do it, or they know how to do it and they're trying to implement it. If you don't adjust their schedules, they're not going to do it, even if you say they should. It needs to be a visible goal, which we got 2.5 years in. It needs to be a requirement for new projects, which we eventually got. I also would say start small. We started really big and then went the other direction. So look for quick win projects that will show value early. We showed value 1.5 years in and sort of started taking off, but we waited 1.5 years to get there. And it helps convince some of the non-believers. Not everybody, but some will see, hey, that little thing added value. I want to talk to you some more about some other things. But you should continue to think big. Think about the large projects you could attempt to take on, but I would highly recommend doing that after you start small. We did that backwards, and that didn't really work out well. We ended up making progress, but I would have preferred now that we started on the little things, gained momentum, and then started working on the large projects. Research long-term projects. You want to avoid getting bogged down in spending years and years trying to build a massive framework that all of a sudden in the end doesn't actually work because now they change things or priorities changed or bad things on the dev side. And find your friends. Find people who are willing to help you in different departments that can assist with the effort of automation. So don't do it alone. Find people in development who will work with you. Find the people in IS who can get you hardware. Maybe talk to legal if you are in a company where you have to talk to legal to get anything that has the word open source in it. Find the people who are willing to assist you in whatever ways you need so that you're not going about it on your own. I think I'm close to 0 time, aren't I? Yeah, okay. I can stop on that. That's good, because I just re-wrap up again at the end. So I can end on that one. So questions, if we have time.
So, question assurance with the lovely Gunnar here as well. Plenty of hands there.
Yes, hi. So looking back at your experience at that company, is there something that you would have done differently?
All kinds of things. I would have demanded a budget up front. I would have asked that development make it a project planning requirement from the start. I would have asked that there be allotted time for QA and dev to learn how to do these things. and I would have started on very small projects first. I would have picked the little things, the really tiny tools that we could build for a bunch of people, because it would save our department tons of time. And then we could say, okay, well, now that you don't have to do that manual test, how about you put that time into learning how to automate? Instead of doing it backwards, where we're trying to build the massive thing, and then we gave them some time a year and a half down the road. I would have rather started with the very small projects first. And we talked about doing that, and it kind of fell apart. And then my team got all excited about writing code, and we built this massive C# thing.
So thank you for that. That experience report is phenomenal because not a lot of people get to go through something like that and learn from something like that. So Attack of the Consultants and then Fighting Back. I couldn't quite see the end of the slide, so I don't know how long after that you actually left the company.
A couple months, like 3 months. They're still they haven't come back yet. They listened to the no. Wow, there's a lot of slides. There you go.
Okay, so how difficult was it to leave the company knowing that you had gone through all of that, implemented quite a lot of change, fought back, and then you leave because you've changed something that is very different, it's new, you've converted people, and to have to leave something like that is very difficult. I mean, I've gone through that, so I know what that feels like. What was that like for you, and how easy or difficult was it for you to leave the company knowing that you had done something so drastic like that and so great? At
the beginning, it was very painful. I had a very difficult time telling my team that I was leaving, because even though they didn't think I was, I felt personally like I was abandoning them in the effort. And I found that that was one of the hardest conversations I've had in the 14 years that I worked there. And I've fired people, not very many, but I've fired people, and this was more painful. It was made easier knowing that the manager who was taking over the team was our performance test manager, so he had some experience in having to start an effort that people didn't really care about and didn't want to listen to, that it eventually turned into now we have teams across the company asking for his input on things. I knew he'd be able to move forward with it, even though he wasn't really involved in automation. He owned a team that was writing code, so he understood that they're not exactly like just hands-on manual testers. They're basically full-time devs. Their focus is a little different than his other team. And that manager also ended up moving under my senior manager, who at the second half of this was really a big champion at that level for automation in general. So I knew it was going into good hands, which helped a lot. It made me feel more comfortable once I learned what the plan was going to be for the team. I felt much more comfortable letting go. It was still kind of hard because I put a lot of time and effort into this, because I started here knowing basically nothing about automation, and I'm still shit at writing code, but that wasn't my job at the end. I led the team and I pushed the effort forward. But yeah, getting it into good hands for when I left was really important. So that helped a lot.
More hands?
One more, maybe?
Well, we got 2 out of them, so we'll give them a little break, yeah? So, Erik, you're standing in a very dangerous position because you're between the people and the lunch.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Go to lunch.
But thank you for your talk. It was very interesting for me as well.
Oh, thank you.